Hi everyone. So today I'm going to try to add migrations to an existing project, and the library that I'm going to be using is called NodeDB Migrate. And so this is the repo that I'm going to be using is the repo in the goals. Like there is a migration snapshot goal. And the objective of this goal is to add migrations to the project and then add a migration for a new table. So first thing I want to do is clone this project. Maybe I forgot that. Right, so now I have the project. And the reason why I chose this library is because it has a lot more stars. That's kind of like the way I look at, not always, but that's a better indicator of like the fact that it's being used by a lot more people. And then also, I was looking for a library where I could write my migrations in SQL, as opposed to writing it in some sort of an abstraction like that the package creates. So this one has decent documentation. I wouldn't say it's like the best documentation, but so they have like a nice UI for their docs. And so in the configuration, one thing that I noticed that you could do is I guess it's in usage. Right, so you can say using files for SQL. So if you prefer to use SQL files for your up and down statements, you can use. So it exposes a way to do that too. They also have a way to like not write SQL and have their own sort of commands for dropping tables and creating tables. But I don't want to do that because everybody knows SQL, and you rather write stuff in SQL than learn another new library. So okay, so given that we're going to use this library, the first thing that we need to do is install this library. So let's do that. And then while that's happening, so they support like different kinds of databases. So the one that we're going to be using is a Postgres database. And there's a separate library for that you kind of have to install. So this is like, so this library is like the parent, and then based on which database you're going to be using, you have to install that corresponding package as well. So let's do that too. Cool. So now we have both of them installed. So if I do a git def on my package.json, I see this. So I guess DB migrate PG has a dependency on DB migrate, so which is why just DB migrate PG is listed here, right? Oh, actually no, wait, my bad. I didn't do a save here. All right, that makes more sense. Cool. So if you look at the installation instructions, we install, and then it gives us a command called db migrate. That's kind of what we use to do a bunch of different things. So you can go up, you can go down, you can reset, you can create. So at this point, I want to ensure that my application supports the different configs that I have in my project. So I have a test configuration, I have a development configuration, and I have a production configuration. So I want my migrations to be able to run against a specific environment, right? So I want to maintain the idea of environments for my migrations. And so this gives you, so the library supports the concept of environments, which is great, right? So we are going to have different environments that we want to like support, and this allows you to do that. So it's typically, this looks like a JSON file. So I need to create a JSON file with like different configs. So let's do that. Oops, where am I? Migration, snapshot. All right, so the first thing, first thing I need to do is create a migration config, which contains config for test, dev, development, and production. So I'm assuming I only have 3 configurations right now, right? And then once I have the config, I need to add the config such that I can use SQL files. Add to the config. And then once I have that, then I need to test or like run db migrate using the config file to see if things work. Actually, before that, I need to add a migration to transpose the schema.sql file into a migration. Right, so this is kind of like the init migration. Cool. So let's start with the first step, which is creating a migrations config. So looking at the docs, I need to create a JSON file, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to go into source. I'm actually going to create a directory. I'm going to create a directory here called config. Oops. Right, so I create a directory called config, and I'm going to create db migrate .json. And what I want in here is the values for the different environments. So another interesting thing that this library does is it allows you to specify a config using an environment variable, which is pretty awesome. Right? In production, I want the config to come from an environment variable because it's secret, right? Like it's only going to be known when I deploy the app. So I can just specify which environment variable that this value comes from, which is pretty cool. So I could copy this. And this becomes, I like to use the full name, and then this becomes PG. This becomes the user. I guess this becomes the PG password. And then database becomes the DB name. I think there's a port too. Port becomes the port. Right, so this is in production, but let's look at something which we normally use, which is development, right? So in development,
we're using PG Promise. Is the driver still PG?
Yeah, PG Promise uses PG under the hood.
Also, I want to ask if we're recording.
Yeah, we're recording.
Thank you.
So in development, since we don't really care about security, we can put in the values right here. Oops. So the right, and the same thing we could do for test as well. So this is fine. So in this case, the objective is to keep the production credentials secure. That's kind of like the ultimate objective. So let's see how to run this now. So, oh, that's pretty neat too. So this uses, so if we have a .env file, it automatically loads it as well. So probably in development, we probably don't need it, because we're using .env in development. Right, so we're just going to reuse those values. Any questions? Yeah, Jonathan?
It says if you're using that package, so do you have to separate and install that feature to work?
Yeah. So I don't know if you've been using a .env package, the package, but I've been recommending using the .env file.
If we use the .env package, are we supposed to only use that in the development environment?
Yeah.
Okay.
So actually, this one doesn't have the .env yet, so we'll have to add it. So let's ignore it for now. I don't have the .env package. But if your project is using it, then you can just reuse those values. You don't have to have an extra development piece here. So, okay. So db migrate can now take a value called config, and then the environment. And the value of whatever the value here is going to try to find that within your config. Right, so we're going to try to run it. So let's do that. So db migrate, and let's do create, because I want to create a migration. Right. So going back to our README file, the first one was create the migration config. So this is sort of done. Right, so that's done. And right, so the other thing I need to do is I need to add, tell the config that I'm using SQL files. So there's a special config that this library needs to tell it that I'm actually using SQL. So this is the SQL file true. So this needs to be added to our config as well. So at the bottom, and since this is a global config, this has to be outside these environments. This has to be top level. Right, because the same migrations are going to be used across the different environments. So it's a configuration that is shared across different environments. Okay, so that's good too. I have that. And then the third one is adding a migration to transpose whatever I have in schema.sql. So right now, I have just a single table here. Right? And just to be a little fancy, let's also add another table. There's an ID, is serial. Primary key. Title is text. Body is text. All right, so let's assume that these two tables existed before, and now we want to create an initial migration for to transpose the schema. So let's do that. So I say create, db migrate create, and init tables. So the config is source/config/dbmigrate.json. Right, so if I do this, it's created 3 files for me. Can everyone see this? Or do I need to increase the font? Okay. So it created like this JSON file, JavaScript file, and it created 2 SQL files, which is the up SQL and the down SQL. So let's look at what each of those files have. So this is the JavaScript file. So this has a bunch of code, which looks kind of crazy. But essentially, it is reading it exposes 2 functions up and down. And it's reading the SQL file for the up SQL file in the up function, and it's reading the down SQL file in down function, and essentially just running that SQL against the database. So this is all things that happen automatically, and we don't have to modify this file at all. What we do need to modify is the SQL files. Right, so the up SQL file is just an empty file. So this is where we're going to add our SQL to go in the forward direction, which is like adding to our schema. So going back to our schema, we're essentially just going to copy these 2 things and put it in here. Right, and in my down schema, I'm going to do the reverse, which is drop table contacts, and then drop table posts. Questions so far? Making sense? Okay. Jonathan, yeah.
So this is to create what's already, well, not what's already there, because one table is there, the other isn't. So you're not actually doing migration to create what is already there. Your first migration is adding one table to it.
No, so this was already there. I just wanted to make the initial schema a little bit more complex. So I just
we're imagining that is the initial.
Right. This is the snapshot at current time, and we want to transpose this into my initial migration. Right. So going back to our config. So let's try to run this against my database. So let's, I may already have this database. I'm just going to drop it. Okay, I don't have it. So I will have to create it. Right, because the migrations are just running against the database, and it assumes that the database is created. So I need to have a separate command to create my database. But let's do it manually for now. So I created the database, and now let's migrate. So instead of running db migrate create, I'm going to do an up. And then I also need to specify the environment that I'm going to be using. Right? So in this case, I want to run it against my test environment. So if I do this, it did some stuff. So it says done. That seems like a good thing. Let's go and check it out. So if I do psql -t contacts test. Cool. So it has contacts. It created a primary key, a sequence, and then it created the post table too. And notice that it created a table called migrations, which isn't specified in the schema. Right? So if I look at what's in there, it's basically an internal table that the library uses to manage the migrations. So it tells you what is the current status of the database in terms of the migrations. So it says that the name of the migrations which has been run is the init tables migrations. So if I create 2 more migrations, so let's say we create a couple more migrations. So let's say I say create, I say add users. Right, so I have a new file, add users, and then the corresponding SQL files for it. So I need to now modify those files. So add users up. So in the up command, up file, I need to add the table. Basically do whatever I need to go in the forward direction. Sometimes I may want to delete columns too, and that's fine. So I create the table users. ID is serial, primary key. Let's say email is Martha of 255. And let's say first name. Last name. Right, and then we have to do the drop, or the down, sorry. And then this will just be drop table users. Yeah.
Isn't it your standard to use singulars for table?
Yes. I'm just, because the schema already had it, I just went stuck with that convention. It's fine. Yeah. But yeah, I would use a singular name. Cool. So, yeah.
I'm curious so that there's contacts. What's the other table that's contacts?
Which one? This one?
One of those. Yeah, that one. And the migration.
So when you create a serial, when you add an attribute serial to a column, it automatically creates this sequence, which manages the state of the serial.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So if you say
table?
no, it's a type is sequence.
It's a sequence. Oh, okay. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, you can actually say, let's see, select star from.
Oh, cool.
So the max value is only this, so you cannot have more than those rows.
Wow.
That's because you didn't use.
How many users our Echo have?
Yeah, that's true.
I guess.
I think it's using 8 bytes for this to store this.
It's not like quadrillion, billion.
All right, so now that we have another migration that we created, we'll notice that this the table that we looked at, this would change when I run migrations again. So let's say I run migrate up again, right? So if I migrate up, it processed the new migration that I created, right? And now if I go to if I say select star from migrations, you'll see that it has add users in there. Right, so let's say, oh, this add users was crazy and we want to go back, right? We want to roll back this migration. So how do we do that? Let's look at the docs. So usage or commands. So we use the down command, and then you can give it like the number of migrations you want to go down. So minus C. And down migrations are called in reverse order. That makes sense, right? So I want to like now undo the add users migration. So when I want to, instead of going up, I'm going to say down, and I'm going to say minus C is 1. That means I want to go 1 back. So I did that, and it dropped table users. Right, so now let's look at what migrations look like. And the entry for the second one is gone. So now it knows that there's one migration ahead still, which hasn't been applied because I rolled back. Yeah.
Can you specify the number with the date? If you don't
Good.
want to count them.
Yeah, good question. So let's see. So minus count, max number of migrations to run. Is there a date here? No, there's no date. So I guess it doesn't allow you to go to a specific date. You have to count.
Just curious.
Okay. So it also allows you to like create databases and drop databases. So it uses the connection that is specified in the config to basically create and drop databases. So if I want to drop my database, I can use one of the connection. But you wouldn't want to do that anyway, because you have because if you want to drop a database, you can't use the connection, the same connection to drop the database, because then it would be like the connection isn't used. You have to use a different connection to drop a database. I guess that's about it. So the only thing that is left is to add this to a package JSON. Right. So we did both these things. So in my package JSON, I will need to so I would create like db migrate. So I could potentially do db migrate and then do, let's see, what was the command? And then I don't know if I can do $1. Probably may not be $1, maybe $2, but let's see. So if I have db migrate test, it would just be npm run db migrate test. So this is what? This is 1, 2, 3, 4 actually. So it's $4. So let's see, npm run db migrate. Unexpected token. Oh.
Oh.
So it got tested. Oh no, wait. Oh, so I don't really need to do that.
Cool.
So technically, I could just do this or development here. Yeah. So since like the database already, I mean the table already exists in my development, it's throwing an error. So in order to fix this issue, what you need to do is you shouldn't deploy to production if you don't have migrations. Like that's firstly a bad practice to do that. So all of this would happen in like your development mode, where you may have a schema file in the beginning because you like quickly want to like come up with something, and then when you're about to deploy to production, you move that into a migration thing, and then you can drop your database in development because you don't really care about it, and you apply those migrations to production when you do the deploy. So as part of your deploy script in production, you would have to call db migrate production every time before you deploy. So Heroku gives you options of like running a specific script before you do before you do an npm start, and that's what you have to do. You have to do that before script would be db migrate production.
I'm curious, like, let's say you were developing for a while and start with a pretty simple schema, and like over the course of development, the schema becomes more complicated, but we don't deploy until like later after it's become more complicated. We wait until then and like use the more complicated schema for our first migration, or do we want to keep track of the schema development over time while we're developing?
Yeah, there's no harm in like keeping track of the schema development over time.
Okay, so it's like not a bad idea to use migrations even during development.
Yeah, totally.
I'm just wondering if you would have a space for the dash P, like if that's necessary for.
Oh, here? Yeah, probably not.
Okay.
Because it adds it adds that space automatically.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah, Sally?
This is like not necessarily relevant to us, but like really big, like Facebook. Like, do they do this sort of thing, or do they have like some sort of other form of database administration?
I mean, they do some sort of migrations for sure. They may not use like, Node DB migrate, but the idea is the same, where they have to track like all of the changes so that you can roll back if something bad happens. But every company does that.
Okay.
Yeah, Jonathan.
A couple of questions. One is, I think testing is part of your plan, and if you were going to do test-driven development, would your first do be to write the tests for migration before you did anything else?
So what do you mean by writing tests for the migration?
Well, the migration, you said that you were going to find out whether the migration works after it's run. So, but finding out how it works is testing, right? So,
right.
If you're doing your test first, if that's your discipline, then would that become the first item on your to-do list?
But I didn't write a test, right? It was a manual test.
Yeah. All kinds of things could go wrong in migration. You might want to write tests forward just to make sure that nothing went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Just assume it's not a simple matter of seeing whether it crashes or something bad happening.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely good practice to write tests for like all the scripts that you create. But it's much harder to write tests for something like your migrations, because you're kind of like you're testing sort of a helper tool, right? Which is just helping apply some code to your database.
There are there are things that you want the database to do directly.
Mhm.
And you could say it better do those things directly after the migration as well as before.
Oh, I see. So you're talking about running tests against a database before applying the changes and after applying the changes. So yeah, so you definitely have a test environment where you're testing all of this, hopefully, right? So you have so in your project, you'd have a continuous integration server.
So we don't need special tests for the migration.
Yes, exactly. And nothing goes to production unless those tests pass.
So my second question is about what would you probably do if you wanted your migration instructions to have some conditional logic in them. For example, if you were going to add a primary key to the context table,
Mm-hmm.
you wanted to check whether there are any duplicates already in the context ID column.
Mm-hmm.
And do one thing if there were duplicates, and do something else if there weren't duplicates.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to the point where you can't do it easily with ordinary SQL, so you'd either have to do with more complex query language, or you do it back in JavaScript.
Right. So that shouldn't be part of your migrations. That should be a separate script that you run either before running the migration or after running the migration.
So in other words, don't even try the migration. So this is like a qualification test for doing a migration.
Yeah, this is just applying schema changes. This isn't like fixing data. Data fixing should not happen in your migrations.
That was my question.
Yeah. So you would have a separate file called scripts/fix bad data for users. And that's like going in and like changing some of the data. And because that's code, right? That's like business logic that, you know, is useful and could be used, and it's good to track that separately. And it doesn't belong in migrations because migrations is only meant for tracking schema changes. And a lot of like, I've seen, I mean, in the beginning of my career, I used to like club the, you know, the fixing of data in my migrations, and it was a very bad practice.
So for example, if we wanted to say, if a down migration shouldn't happen, the row count in a table that's going to drop is not 0, that would be some handle before we tried the migration. You wouldn't even do the migration until you can ascertain that it has no rows.
Yeah.
What happens to the data that's already in a database when you're like doing migration? Like, let's say you change like the width of the column. Like,
If you change what?
let's say like you were like, oh, this is a bar chart 10 and not
Oh,
bar chart
right.
12. Like, what happens to the data if you do that sort of schema
Yeah, that's a
change?
good question. So like when you're applying migrations, some migrations lock the table. So for example, if you are changing the width of a column, while that operation is happening, the table is locked. So no new changes can be applied to that table, which is sometimes very bad, right? Because that means that all users who are currently using the system will not be able to like access or update the data in the table. So you have to be careful about what kinds of changes you're applying. So adding a new column is fine because you're not because it's not like manipulating existing data. But when you're manipulating existing data, then that's like a lock. So based on the kinds of operations you're doing, you have to like probably time it such that, you know, you're doing it at a time which, like, you know, you're not moving many users, you're not doing it during peak hours. So those are the kinds of trade-offs you have to make.
Like, let's say you were like changing something from like a number to a string. Would you want to like copy the data to a new column and then copy it back? Or like
Changing a number to a string, what do you mean?
or I don't know, this is like hypothetical,
Right.
but like let's say you're changing the data type.
Uh-huh.
Like I feel like there's like a risk of the data just like disappearing.
Yeah, so you would, I would not like rename the column, I would add a new column.
Uh-huh. And then you would like
And then transpose that data to
copy
the
the
old column
data
and then
over.
drop the other
But
column.
if you were like reversing it,
Reversing it?
if you were like migrating back down, you would have to do a data like
So I would
It's a
just
schema change.
so I would add a new column,
Uh-huh.
right? So the up would be adding a column, and the down would be dropping that column.
Right.
I wouldn't change the old column.
But if you just did the migrations, you would lose the data. If you didn't
Why would I lose the data?
if you didn't maintain the copy of the data, like if you dropped the old
Yeah. So
column.
do not drop the old column.
Oh, don't drop the old column.
Yeah. Let that be. So you just have incremental changes. So once you're confident that the new column is good, then you can think about dropping the old column. Never
Okay.
drop the old column before you're confident that the new column is doing its thing.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, Jonathan.
So I guess in realistic situations, what you think about as one migration might really need to be two. Because like you add a join table so that you can assign multiple roles to somebody, to people after you have initially assigned only one
Mhm.
in a certain column. And so you do that migration by adding that table. Then you move separately, you move data into the new table, then the whole column becomes empty. Then you do a second migration in order to delete that.
Right. Yeah. So whenever you're deleting like tables because it's like obsolete, you always do that after you have added the new changes. Because what happens sometimes is you may have many machines running your software, right? So let's say you have 5 machines which are like running your software, and now you deploy new changes to your software, which is now using the new new columns and the new tables that you've created. But and when you deploy code, it doesn't all happen at the same time. It takes time before all of the machines have caught up with the latest code, right? So there may be some. So now let's assume that you've run your migrations and you've dropped a column. There may be some machines which are still dependent on the old code, which expect that column to exist. So there may be a few minutes or however long it takes for all of the machines to catch up, where they will face severe bugs because those columns and those tables don't exist. So always make sure you're applying like the new changes, and then at a later time you're doing the dropping of the old stuff which you don't need anymore. Yeah.
So would you then, if you want to be totally careful in that kind of environment, would you have to actually modify the query codes to check both the old column and the new table, for example, to see where the data happened to be on the machine that you're running a query against? Then you finish the migration and the data transport, and then you retire the part of the code and check to see whether the data are in the old column. You haven't changed in the functions that are performing queries as well as in the data themselves temporarily.
So the question is,
Transition.
if you have, so what do you do during the transition plan? Yeah, so I would just wait for my code to stabilize and like to ensure that everything is working as expected. And then I'm like, okay, now we don't need this old system. Nobody's using the old system anymore. This table is like obsolete. Then I drop the table.
And then you just would accept that you can't migrate down, right? Because that
Yeah.
it's like
Because
there's a point of no return.
Right, the data is gone. Yeah. You can come back, but the data is not going to be there. So the schema doesn't conserve data. It's only for the schema. So does everyone understand the difference between the schema and the actual data?
So it's not like basically automated. It's not like garbage collection, like in tables and stuff. You have to actually do it manually. It's not a process that's automated. When you have like stale tables, stale data that's sitting there for that migration.
Yeah.
It's not automated, right?
Yeah, because the database doesn't know whether this table is important or not.
Sure.
That's your analysis of the data, right? So garbage collection is when when that piece of memory is no longer being used.
Yeah, but
It's no longer referenced by anybody, and it's like, okay, I can reuse this memory. But data has value in it, and the table doesn't really care about whether it is X or Y. For it, it's data, right? And it doesn't know whether it's going to be used by somebody else in the future or not. You cannot create a garbage collector for, I guess you potentially could. Maybe you can look at like how many hits you have had over the last year and then automatically drop stuff. But I don't know, sometimes that may be dangerous. Cool. Any other questions? Thoughts? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.